Thank you. Thank you so much. What wonderful stories they were. I feel quite intimidated in the actual fact. People ask me a lot, why did I write this book now? And the simple answer is I didn't know I could write a book. It took me a long enough time, I must say. But the book is about my time with David in the 70s, and I'm going to tell it to you now, a little synopsis. I was born a few years after World War II and lived with my parents in a typical suburban house in a typical suburban town, Bromley in Kent. My parents got married after the war simply because that's what everybody was doing. The government encouraged families and were generous with allowances. My brother and I used to get free milk and cheap lunches at school. Both my parents worked. My father was a long-distance lorry driver who delivered meat all over England, and my mum was an assistant in the local chemist shop. I don't think my parents expected too much from me. I think they thought I would, leave school, have a bit of fun, get a job, and get married and live around the corner. Well, the swinging 60s changed all of that. It was a great time to be a teenager in London in the 60s. I mean, we seemed to have it all. Great music. I mean, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, what fantastic music. Groundbreaking fashion and a brand new medical breakthrough. The pill. It changed a lot of things. I was not good at school. I didn't like school. I left school when I was 15. And my mum said, I had to get a trade. And it was either secretarial or hairdressing. Well, hairdressing won. And I was enrolled in the Evelyn Paget College of Hair and Beauty in Bromley to study hairdressing. Well, it turned out I was quite good at hairdressing. And after I passed my course, they transferred me down to Evelyn Paget's of Beckenham. It was here I met Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones was my 2:45 shampoo and set on a Thursday afternoon. Every once in a while, she'd have a trim and now and again a chocolate kiss rinse. As I was doing her hair, she would talk to me about her son, David. Well, I would smile and nod, as you do. She would tell me how artistic he was. He was in a band and he played piano and guitar. And it wasn't until she mentioned Space Oddity that my ears pricked up. I said, Space Oddity? I've heard that on the radio. She said, well, it was a hit, I said, are we talking about David Bowie? Yes, she said, I'm his mum. Well, I'd heard about David Bowie. There was a buzz about David in Beckenham. He used to do an arty thing down at the Three Tuns. Played folk music, I thought. I hadn't been. The first time I actually saw David, he was walking around down Beckenham High Street wearing a dress. He was with this girl who had on these skinny black pants and a furry jacket. And I met the girl. She came into the salon with Mrs. Jones. It was Angie, David's wife. Well, I liked her right away. She was so cool and confident, and she looked so good. She had this, as I say, this great jacket and pants on. You didn't find coats like that in Beckenham. As I did her hair, and when she spoke, she was American. I'd never met an American person before. As I was doing her hair, she told me a bit about her life. She would go to gigs with David and she would operate a follow spot if there was one and help the band with their costumes and the changing. And she seemed incredible to me. The whole thing sounded so glamorous. She left with a big tip and a smile and promised to come back. Well, I didn't see her for a few months. It was Christmas before she came back. Well, every self-respecting hairdresser knows that you're fully booked at Christmas, so I didn't have time to do her hair. I saw her leave the salon and followed her outside and said, Angie, I can come to your house and do your hair if you like. She accepted and off I went to Haddon Hall. Haddon Hall was about a mile out of town. It was one of those Victorian mansions that had been divided into flats. David and Angie had the ground floor. It wasn't the sheer size of it that was overwhelming. It was the way it was decorated. A midnight blue carpet, midnight blue walls, and a silver ceiling. There wasn't much furniture, a couch against a wall, some musical equipment, some cushions on the floor, a long, low coffee table covered with album covers and magazines, and David sitting in the bay window flipping through a magazine. He and Angie were discussing the merits of cutting his hair short. He had kind of long, blonde, wavy hair at the time. Angie asked me my opinion. Well, I said, nobody's got short hair, and it was true, nobody did. It might look quite good. And David gets up and he comes over and he shows me this photograph of this young girl in a magazine with this short red spiky hair and says, can you do that? As I'm saying yes, I'm thinking to myself, that's a girl's hairstyle, and how am I going to actually do it? Inside, though, I was excited. I mean, David was the perfect person to carry off a hairstyle like this. He was tall, rock star thin, long neck, great face. I mean, if I could pull it off, it might look really good. Well, it took me about a half an hour to cut. I was cautiously optimistic, but it didn't work. By the time I finished, it wouldn't stand up. It just kind of flopped. I didn't know what to say. I mean, David doesn't look too happy and I don't feel too bright. But I said, David, the second we dye your hair, the texture will change and it will stand up. I was praying I was right. I found the colour quite quickly the next day at my work. I snipped someone's hair off and did the colour on it. Red Hot Red by Schwarzkopf from their fantasy range. I used 30 volume peroxide to give it some lift. Now to make it stand up. We didn't have gels like you have today. I think the most thing we have was like soft setting lotions or dippity-do, and that wasn't going to do it. I remembered using an anti-dandruff treatment. I said on the old girls at the salon, it was Guard from Germany. Side effect, it set hair like stone. So I used that. Any doubts David had disappeared the second he saw himself in the mirror with that bright red hair sticking straight up on his head. He looked incredible. And a huge wave of relief washed over me. I'd done it. I'd done it. It was standing up. He's running around. He wants to go to the sombrero with Angie. And I start packing my things to leave. Angie says, how much do we owe you? I think I said, £2, please. They left and I left, and it wasn't for a while when Angie called me. Angie called me a month or so later and she said, the band are playing in London. Would you like to come up and see the band play? Yes. I got a couple of girlfriends. I still wasn't sure what to expect. We played folk music, remember? He'd had the hit Space Oddity, but it hadn't been for a couple of years. You know, I thought he might be a one-hit wonder. We drove up in my car, and when I got to the college, I mean, the first thing, this place was jumping. It was sold out. There was kids everywhere. These kids were about my age, but they weren't like me. They were like well-educated kids. We went into the venue and sat on the floor, and some lights went down and some music came on, some classical music, and David and the band took to the stage. It was a real, oh my God moment for me. David was in full makeup, wearing a costume, like a bright red costume with long red plastic red boots. All the band were in costumes. I found out later they'd been made from curtain materials from Liberties of London. They looked incredible, and when they played, I mean, they just blew the roof off this place. They were so good. I went home thinking to myself, well, that wasn't folk music. It was incredible. Angie called about a week or so later and said, did I like the gig? Yeah, I loved the gig. Would I like to come back over? There was someone she wanted me to meet. I went back to Haddon Hall, and standing in the hallway was a tall, slim young man with blonde hair and blue eyes, dressed beautifully. And he kind of twirled and lisped and minced a bit. And I was entranced by this man. It was Freddie Boretti. He helped design the costumes for David. Well, I was entranced by him. I'd never met a gay man before, so it was really unbelievable. Later that evening, we're in the living room, and I watch as David leant over and gave Freddie a big kiss, like a proper kiss, right on the mouth. I didn't know which way to look. I mean, I was so shocked. I looked at Angie, and Angie went, "Oh, boys will be boys." And I suddenly felt completely out of my depth. I didn't know the boys kissed. I didn't know any of the people they were talking about. I had never heard of Nietzsche or Iggy Pop or Lou Reed. I might as well, I was only 2 miles from home, but I might have well have been a million miles away. Before I left, though, Angie took me to one side and said, "David and I have been talking, and we'd like you to leave your job and come on the road with us. Go see our manager tomorrow, sort out your wages, and come on the road." Well, I was both excited and, kind to be honest with you, terrified. These people weren't like anybody I'd ever met before. I was a bit scared. But I did go see the manager, Tony DeVries. And by the end of the afternoon, I got the job. I'm driving home, still terrified, but also very excited, thinking to myself, my life is going to really change. I'm going on the road with a rock and roll band. I could scarcely believe it. I told my mum, and then I went down to Evelyn Paget's and gave my notice in. My boss looked at me and said, "You know, Suzanne, you should think twice before giving up a well-paying, secure job." I said, "Yes, I have." After that, my confidence knew no bounds. I took Woody the drummer and turned him into a blonde Ziggy. I chopped off Trevor Boulder's hair, he was the bass player, and dyed it blue-black. The only holdout was Mick Ronson. He didn't want me to touch his hair, and I'm not really sure why. David was the most ambitious person I'd ever met. He was all about how to step forward, how to make things work, and he wanted to do rock and roll theatre. So his manager hired the Rainbow Theatre in Finsbury Park, and we were all set up there to put on this amazing show. And it was an amazing show. We had scaffolding, dancers, Lindsay Kemp came, mime artists, scaffolding, dried ice. We worked there like 8 hours a day. We were sworn to secrecy. Don't talk to the press. Don't tell anybody anything. It's a big secret. Well, of course, the more you make of these things, the more they become. By the time the show came around, we'd sold out. The audience went wild. They loved it. I think the only person that didn't like it was Elton John. He walked out halfway through saying, "This isn't rock." And it might not have been rock and roll, but whatever it was great. So we started touring England, and you could just feel the momentum gathering with this thing. Every night we sold out. Every night there were fans chasing us across, chasing the bus, mobbing the band. It was really incredible. I didn't know quite how to deal with all. I think none of us had ever done this before, so it was really quite a unique experience. I wanted to go to America with them, and I wasn't sure I was going to be invited, but at the last minute I was. We went to America, and we started in New York and stayed at the Plaza Hotel in New York. What an amazing hotel. It's a bit like the Dorchester in London. We never had any cash on these tours, though. There was never any actual money. We could stay in the finest hotels and order room service, but there was never any actually cash in the hand. I had a bit for, costumes and whatnot. We went down very well in America, so we started going across country. And David wasn't flying. He wouldn't fly. He had to drive everywhere. So we left him in Kansas, and the band and I flew into LA and went up to the Beverly Hills Hotel. Beautiful pink confection of a hotel situated in dark green vegetation. It was here I met Iggy Pop. He was at the pool, and I'm lying down ordering myself a lunchtime cocktail. It was a beautiful place, great pool. And I felt a shadow come over me, and it was Iggy. I looked up and I was surprised. I was even more surprised when he sat down. I didn't think he knew who I was. He started talking to me about his hair. He wanted to make a change. And I looked at him, and really, I quite liked his hair. He had this long, messed up do. It was a great haircut. I couldn't think of anything I could do to make it better. Then he mentioned colour. Well, I had some blue that I used to use on Trevor. Later that evening, with bleach, colour, scissors and cape in hand, I went to Iggy's room. I bleached out big clumps of his hair white and added this blue, so it was a really good colour. And Iggy said to me, I said to him at the end, don't go in the pool. And that colour needs time to set. Well, he didn't pay me any mind. By the end of the afternoon, he'd been in the pool and there was a streak of blue from one end to the other. I went to Japan with them, met Kansai Yamamoto, picked up some fabulous Japanese costumes. And suddenly I was important. The girl with the thick frizzy hair had disappeared. I was somebody else entirely. After that tour, I went back to Beckenham. I walked around Beckenham High Street, looked at all the shop windows, and Beckenham hadn't changed. I'd changed so much. I'm so grateful for David. He took a big chance on me, took me on the road with him. I want to thank him for that. My haircut's on British currency now, the Brixton £10 note. Who would have thought I could have done that? Thank you so much.